You think you know how a bar fight ends when an 8-foot predator demands answers. 3 drinks in, I thought I did too. Then I watched a human freighter pilot stare down certain death with nothing but a beer bottle, and the galaxy's worst sense of timing. What happened next rewrote the rules of interspecies diplomacy forever. You won't find Zix's Cantina on any official star charts or port registries. The place operates in those perfect little gaps where 3 different sectors overlap, just enough that nobody claims jurisdiction. Some clever entrepreneur had the bright idea to park a retired cargo hauler right at that sweet spot where the trisector accord gets conveniently fuzzy about enforcement protocols. The environmental systems were a mess that defied all reasonable maintenance schedules. Gravity would flicker without warning, sometimes dropping to half strength for exactly 17 seconds before slamming back to normal. Regulars developed this almost psychic sense for the changes. You'd see them subtly bracing themselves a second before the inertial dampeners hiccuped. The oxygen mix cycled between thin and thick like the ship itself was breathing improperly. Trying to enjoy a drink there meant constantly accounting for variables that shouldn't exist in civilized space. Your glass might suddenly float away from your hand if the artificial gravity decided to take a coffee break. Condensation dripped upward sometimes when the thermal regulators malfunctioned. The yellow-green lighting that everyone assumed was meant to be atmospheric, actually failing filtration systems struggling to process a dozen different alien biologics simultaneously. Psychologists have a term for places like this: edge environments. Constant low-grade danger that keeps everyone slightly on edge, while simultaneously lowering their inhibitions. The combination of unreliable life support and questionable company creates this fascinating pressure cooker effect. You get species mixing that would never happen under normal circumstances, because everyone's just trying to survive the next atmospheric fluctuation. The clientele self-selects for risk-takers and improvisers. You don't casually pop into Zix's for a quick drink after work. The people who frequent this place either have nowhere else to go, or specifically want the kind of interactions that can't happen under proper lighting, with stable gravity. It's where smugglers meet informants, where outcasts trade secrets, where the galaxy's loose threads come to potentially unravel. What made Zix's truly dangerous wasn't the faulty systems or the mixed company. It was the combination, this unstable ecosystem where anything could become the spark that ignited conflict. The environmental instability meant weapons might not work properly, which ironically made physical violence more likely rather than less. When your plasma pistol might backfire due to pressure changes, you're more inclined to just throw a punch. Into this beautifully dysfunctional pressure cooker walked the ultimate predator. When a Vashtai warrior enters a room, the conversation doesn't just pause, it actively flees. The atmosphere curdles. You get this immediate redistribution of personal space as everyone subconsciously clears a radius around the newcomer, standing nearly 9 feet tall. This particular specimen's crimson carapace absorbed light with that unnerving quality that makes your eyes slide off it, like trying to focus on a gravitational anomaly. Ritual scarifications covered its entire body in patterns that told stories you probably didn't want to hear. Each line represented a specific victory, a conquered opponent, a battle survived. The arrangement wasn't random. Vashtai scar patterns follow strict cultural codes that communicate everything from clan affiliation to kill counts. They're walking resumes written in flesh, and this one's resume was extensive. Its copper-colored eyes swept the room with the dispassionate evaluation of someone checking a menu, deciding which item might be worth sampling tonight. The Vashtai have operated along the Federation's edges for 3 centuries, and their entire diplomatic approach boils down to applied intimidation theory. They don't negotiate. They demonstrate overwhelming force until the other party realizes cooperation is the least terrible option. Apex predator species generally skip the pleasantries and go straight to establishing dominance through visible threat displays. Their reputation travels through neutral space like seismic activity before an earthquake. Everyone knows something's coming, just not exactly when or where it will hit. This warrior's entrance wasn't casual. The posture, the scanning pattern, the way its claws remained partially extended. This was a targeted operation, not a social call. Vashtai don't visit bars to unwind. They visit bars when they need something that isn't available through official channels, and they've determined that fear will work better than currency. The bartender immediately activated the emergency protocols everyone knew but never discussed. The subtle hand signal to the security system, the repositioning of the emergency alert button, the careful neutral expression that says, "I'm not a threat, but I'm also not prey." Every species in that room understood the unwritten rules of Vashti encounters. Don't make eye contact. Don't move suddenly, and definitely don't interfere. The protocols existed for good reason. Vashti interactions tend to end messily for anyone who misunderstands the power dynamic. This warrior needed specific information about ship movements, and Vashti tradition strongly discourages asking politely when demanding violently works just as well. The bartender knew the drill. The smugglers knew the drill. Even the drunken mercenaries in the corner knew enough to suddenly become very interested in their drinks. Everyone in that pressure cooker environment understood the established protocol for surviving a Vashti information extraction. Every single person followed the rules they'd been taught about predator encounters, except one human. Most species would either scramble for cover or freeze completely. The human, 3 drinks deep into what passed for shore leave in this sector, did something else entirely. He made a joke about the bar's cleaning policies. While the rest of us were calculating survival probabilities and exit strategies, Danny Kowalski was treating the approach of a 9-foot killing machine as mildly inconvenient entertainment. He'd been casually reviewing cargo manifests on his datapad like they were philosophical texts, occasionally sipping something that probably started as beer. Before the cantina's questionable filtration systems got to it, his comment about not bleeding on the polished surface wasn't bravery in any conventional sense. It was more like casually flicking a sleeping dragon on the nose with a very short stick, the kind of move that either gets you celebrated or incinerated, with very little middle ground. Where everyone else saw immediate mortal danger, he apparently saw poor bar etiquette disrupting his drinking time. The psychology here is actually fascinating. Humans frequently use humor as a coping mechanism in high-stress scenarios, which creates this unpredictable variable in conflict equations. It can either diffuse tension spectacularly well or escalate things to catastrophic levels without warning. This pattern of responding to discomfort with comedy represents a distinct cognitive approach to threat assessment. Instead of the standard fight-or-flight response, you get this third option where the human brain decides to test the boundaries of social interaction, even when facing imminent dismemberment. He wasn't armed with anything more dangerous than a half-empty bottle. He wasn't wearing anything resembling protective gear. His entire defensive strategy seemed to consist of being annoyingly conversational at the worst possible moment. The really interesting part was how he delivered the line. Not as a challenge, not as defiance, but as this dry observation about maintenance costs, as if the primary concern wasn't the 8 feet of razor-sharp predator standing over him, but whether the bartender would have to break out the special cleaning supplies afterward. That particular flavor of casual disrespect either gets you memorialized in song or turned into component parts, with the outcome depending entirely on how the predator interprets the tone. What made it work was the complete absence of visible fear. Not the suppressed fear of a trained warrior, but the genuine lack of concern you see in someone who either doesn't understand the situation or has decided the rules don't apply to them. The Vashti clearly wasn't accustomed to being interrupted, especially not by what amounted to improv comedy at knife point. When the Vashti growled its demand for a specific ship's departure schedule, Danny didn't reach for coordinates or timestamps. He launched into what amounted to an impromptu philosophy seminar on the nature of time itself. See, 3 days ago seems straightforward until you account for how time becomes this elastic concept out in the deep black, near neutral zones where multiple gravitational fields intersect. Temporal reference points get messy in ways that make scheduled meetups more like educated guesses. Ship time varies by vessel based on their last system sync. Local time depends on whatever rock you're orbiting at the moment. Standard galactic time tries to impose order, but ends up being just another competing standard. The temporal distortions around sector boundaries mean a ship could be running 17 minutes ahead or behind, depending on which calibration method they used last. Trying to pin down when something happened becomes like coordinating a meeting, using 3 different calendar systems from civilizations that can't agree on when the new year starts or how long a week should be. Diplomatic records show temporal misunderstandings cause more interstellar incidents than weapons, malfunctions, or translation errors combined. Different species perceive and measure time differently, and when you add relativistic effects to the mix, you get arguments that can escalate quickly. Danny framed this not as evasion but as essential education, showing the warrior why its question was fundamentally unanswerable in any meaningful way. He explained how the ship it was tracking used Martian timekeeping based on a modified Unix epoch, while the Vashtai clearly operated on their homeworld's triple-day cycle, and the station where the encounter happened used something called corporate imperial time that rounded to 15-minute increments for billing purposes. This approach works surprisingly well with hyperlogical species because it attacks the premise rather than refusing the request. Instead of saying, "I won't tell you," he was saying, "Your question makes no sense contextually." The reframing forced the Vashtai to reconsider its entire approach rather than simply escalating threats. He wasn't just buying time through technicalities. He was demonstrating that the concept of when was itself the problem, that in deep space, especially in contested regions, time becomes a negotiated construct rather than an absolute measurement. The three-part explanation covered relativistic drift, calibration inconsistencies, and cultural timing differences that together made any definite answer meaningless. What could have been a simple demand for coordinates became a lesson in why coordinates without temporal context are worse than useless. The realization that the question itself was flawed changed the interaction from interrogation to something resembling a technical consultation, but logic puzzles and temporal philosophy only get you so far with a predator that measures conversations in potential casualties. Technicalities might create a temporary pause, but they don't address the emotional core of why a 9-foot warrior storms into a bar demanding information. For that, Danny needed to shift from talking about when things happened to talking about who was involved. Here's where the whole interaction pivoted from clever evasion to something uncomfortably personal. Danny stopped talking about temporal mechanics and started talking about family. The name Kethvar changed everything. See, Kethvar wasn't just another Vashtai scout who'd gone missing near neutral space. He was clutch brother to this 9-foot warrior currently threatening everyone in the bar. For Vashtai, that clutch relationship carries more weight than military rank, clan allegiance, or even self-preservation instincts. It's the kind of bond that rewrites priorities completely. Think of it as the difference between asking about some random soldier and asking about someone's sibling. The emotional weight shifts the entire conversation from abstract to painfully specific. Even highly aggressive predator species often maintain these complex kinship structures beneath all the scar tissue and threat displays. The smartest diplomatic operators know that underneath the carapace there's usually family drama waiting to be leveraged. Danny didn't just know the name Kethvar. He knew the story. How that particular Vashtai hunted, what honor codes he followed, which tactical patterns he preferred. He knew details about hunting rituals and personal values that no human should reasonably possess about a species that generally considers humans either prey or pests. This shift from technical evasion to personal revelation changes how predators process information. Personalizing conflict triggers different cognitive pathways than abstract threats do. Instead of evaluating danger, they start evaluating relationships. This wasn't some clever bluff or lucky guess. The specificity of the details made that clear. Danny spoke about Kethvar's approach to ambush tactics, his preference for certain weapon modifications, even how he arranged his ritual scars to tell specific stories about particular victories. The warrior's posture changed completely, the aggressive stance softening into something more attentive, more curious about how a human could know these things. The revelation that Kethvar was clutch brother transformed the entire dynamic. Danny wasn't talking to a generic predator doing routine intimidation work anymore. He was speaking to a grieving family member who'd lost someone important. The medical supply run to Caridia suddenly became much more complicated than simple delivery schedules when viewed through that lens. This wasn't about tracking a ship's movements anymore. This was about understanding what happened to someone's brother. The official report listed mechanical failure as the cause. The truth involved precise plasma fire and professional treachery. Kethvar's ship wasn't disabled by some random malfunction. It was deliberately targeted by a syndicate hit team that knew exactly when and where to strike, with intimate knowledge of his vessel's specific vulnerabilities. The sabotage wasn't some amateur pirate operation. This was the kind of work that costs more than credits to arrange, the sort that requires access to confidential flight patterns and system schematics. This wasn't random violence or opportunistic piracy. The attack pattern showed surgical precision designed to look like an accident. In conflict analysis, the difference between random and targeted action reveals everything about perpetrator motives and capabilities. Random acts show opportunism and desperation. Targeted strikes demonstrate resources, planning, and specific intent. The syndicate raiders hit specific systems in a specific sequence that would create the appearance of cascade failures rather than weapons. Fire. The attackers used modified plasma cutters, tuned to mimic energy surge damage rather than battle scarring. They targeted life support junctions and navigation relays in patterns that would suggest systems overload rather than external attack. The coordination suggested inside knowledge. Someone had provided not just coordinates but detailed technical specifications about shield frequencies and engine modulation patterns. Such precision attacks typically indicate either personal vendettas or strategic elimination of specific political threats, rather than simple resource acquisition. Victoria, Vasquez's medical supply ship, arrived well after the ambush concluded, not before. The timeline matters significantly here. Her vessel's log showed she entered the sector hours after the attack signature dissipated, which forensic analysis later confirmed through residual energy readings and debris scatter patterns. The medical run to the Caridian colonies was exactly what it appeared to be: humanitarian aid delivery with standard cargo manifests and approved flight plans. What really happened during that ambush had nothing to do with medical supplies and everything to do with internal Vashti power struggles. Someone within Kethvar's own command structure likely provided the syndicate with his patrol route and tactical weaknesses. The attack was less about eliminating a random scout and more about removing a specific individual who might have been inconvenient to certain political factions. The syndicate's involvement provided plausible deniability, while their reputation for brutality ensured the job would be thorough. Danny's freighter happened to be conducting a routine sensor calibration sweep in a neighboring asteroid field when the attack occurred. His ship's passive monitoring systems captured the entire engagement, despite being far outside normal detection ranges. The data showed 3 small attack craft emerging from an abandoned mining station, executing a perfectly coordinated strike, then vanishing back into the asteroid field's sensor shadows. The precision suggested rehearsals and detailed intelligence rather than improvised piracy. Danny didn't just witness what happened through sensor logs. He made the decision to intervene when he realized the syndicate team was returning to finish the job after their initial attack disabled, but didn't destroy Kethvar's vessel. Here's where Danny's situation shifted from witness to participant, despite all professional wisdom advising otherwise. The first rule of neutral space exists for good reason. Don't get involved in other people's conflicts, especially when you're flying an unarmed freighter with minimal defensive capabilities. His ship lacked weapons, armor, and any combat-rated systems. What it possessed instead was several hundred tons of mass moving at considerable velocity. Improvised weaponry often proves more effective than conventional arms precisely because it violates expected engagement parameters. The syndicate raiders anticipated resistance from military vessels with standardized attack patterns and recognizable tactical responses. They didn't expect a freighter pilot to start using cargo containers as kinetic impact weapons. This pattern of unconventional engagement appears repeatedly throughout human conflict history, particularly in scenarios where technological disadvantages force creative solutions. Imagine using a cargo hauler as a battering ram instead of a transport vehicle. That's not tactics in any traditional sense, it's applied physics with destructive consequences. Danny calculated trajectories and release timings, turning his ship's primary function against attackers who'd never considered freighters as offensive threats. The raiders' targeting system struggled to categorize the incoming cargo containers as weapons rather than debris, creating crucial seconds of confusion that Danny exploited. His approach leveraged the element of surprise through violating combat norms. While the raiders concentrated on standard evasive maneuvers against expected weapons fire, they failed to account for massive objects being shoved into their flight paths. The disruption of established combat protocols gave Danny asymmetric advantages despite his technological inferiority. This method of creating chaos through unexpected engagement styles frequently allows under-equipped forces to overcome better-armed opponents. Danny didn't merely disable the syndicate vessels temporarily. He eliminated them completely through calculated impacts that breached reactors and compromised structural integrity. The Raiders' overconfidence in their technological superiority became their critical vulnerability when facing someone who understood that mass and velocity can be just as lethal as plasma weapons. Their reliance on conventional warfare assumptions left them unprepared for creative applications of cargo management systems. How does a freighter pilot end up killing professional raiders to protect a Vashti scout? By recognizing that sometimes the most effective weapon is whatever object happens to be heavy and moving fast at the right moment. Danny used his ship's fundamental characteristics, its mass, momentum, and cargo capacity, as offensive tools rather than defensive limitations. This left him with significant hull damage, a grateful Vashti scout whose ship was beyond saving, and an extremely complicated story that would eventually need explaining to multiple interested parties. The aftermath involved temporary life support sharing, emergency repairs using whatever components weren't completely destroyed, and the beginning of an unlikely interspecies partnership forged through shared survival against common enemies. The official report listed the cause as rapid cellular degradation, one of those wonderfully vague medical terms that could mean anything from natural causes to deliberate poisoning. The Vashti warriors had their own simpler assessment: betrayal. See, Kethvar didn't actually die in that syndicate ambush. Danny's improvised rescue operation worked well enough that the Vashti scout survived, got patched up with whatever medical supplies were available, and actually made it back to his clan headquarters. That's when things got really interesting. Weeks after returning home, apparently recovered from his injuries, Kethvar developed what looked like incredibly aggressive cancer and died in considerable pain. The timing was suspiciously convenient, right when he might have been able to identify who specifically had betrayed his patrol route to the syndicate. In intelligence circles, coincidental deaths following survival of attacks are automatically treated as potential continuations of the original threat until proven otherwise. Advanced civilizations frequently develop assassination methods that mimic natural causes, precisely to avoid retaliation cycles. The Vashti medical examination eventually found trace toxins consistent with syndicate bioweapons, rather than any natural illness. The assassination method was sophisticated enough to initially pass as cellular degradation, but detailed analysis revealed signatures of targeted biological agents designed to trigger rapid neural tissue collapse. This wasn't some random medical tragedy. This was a professional cover-up operation, using technology that blurred the line between natural death and murder. The entire situation shifted from being about a failed ambush to being about eliminating someone who knew too much. Kethvar's survival had become inconvenient for whoever provided his coordinates to the syndicate. His subsequent death ensured that particular trail went cold permanently. The warriors understood this instinctively. Their culture places immense value on vengeance and honor, and this death smelled wrong from the beginning. Victoria Vasquez suddenly found herself in mortal danger not because of anything she did, but because of what someone might have used her medical supply run to conceal. The possibility existed that her humanitarian mission to Caridia had been compromised, that among the legitimate medical supplies, someone had smuggled whatever bioweapon eventually killed Kethvar. The timing of her shipment coincided suspiciously with when the toxins would have been administered. This transformed her from potential witness to potential accomplice in the eyes of a grieving warrior seeking justice. The warrior in that bar wasn't just hunting for information about ship movements anymore. It was pursuing justice for a clutch brother whose death represented not just loss, but profound dishonor. The shift from seeking facts to seeking retribution changed the stakes completely. What began as an information extraction had become a personal crusade, and Victoria's potential connection to the bioweapon made her survival dependent on proving she delivered nothing but medical supplies. Just when the confrontation reached that critical pressure point where claws were about to meet flesh, the entire dynamic shifted. Authority arrived without fanfare. Thakmore of the Crimson Talon clan didn't make one of those dramatic entrances you see in security footage. He simply appeared near the bartender's station, as if he'd been observing from the shadows the whole time, which he probably had. Where the younger warrior represented pure hunting instinct and immediate threat response, Thakmore embodied calculated clan politics. This was the difference between a frontline soldier and a general staff officer. Same uniform, completely different operational perspective. In hierarchical predator societies, elder members frequently intervene when junior warriors risk damaging broader strategic interests through personal vendettas. The potential fallout from killing a human who'd saved a clan member, even accidentally, could create diplomatic complications the Vashtai didn't need. Thakmor assessed the situation through an entirely different lens than his junior clansmen. Instead of measuring threat levels and calculating attack angles, he was conducting a cost-benefit analysis of potential outcomes. Such interventions typically occur when the strategic damage of conflict outweighs the emotional satisfaction of victory. The Elder's presence signaled that this situation had escalated beyond personal vengeance into something affecting clan reputation and future operations. He wasn't there to support the warriors' hunt for answers. He was there to evaluate the human who kept surviving situations that should have killed him. Danny had transitioned from potential witness to strategic asset in Thakmor's assessment, someone who understood Vashtai culture well enough to reference clutch brother relationships yet remained unpredictable enough to be interesting. The Elder recognized that humans who survive multiple encounters with Syndicate forces and Vashtai warriors might possess knowledge worth preserving rather than eliminating. Why does a Crimson Talon clan elder materialize in a failing cantina during a routine interrogation? Because Danny's combination of technical knowledge, personal connections to Vashtai culture, and demonstrated survival skills made him more valuable to the clan alive than dead. Thakmor understood that sometimes the most dangerous individuals aren't those who present obvious threats, but those who keep accidentally stumbling into situations they shouldn't survive and emerging with useful information. The mark Thakmor placed on the bar counter wasn't a threat or a warning. It was a contract. This dangerous duality frequently characterizes species undergoing rapid galactic expansion before developing proper diplomatic filters. Early human colonies across 3 sectors demonstrate this pattern perfectly. Rapid growth fueled by cooperative instincts, accompanied by predictable vulnerability cycles where trust is repeatedly exploited before lessons are learned. The Galactic Federation's cautious approach toward humanity stems directly from observing this pattern across multiple species' histories. The galaxy was rapidly learning how to interact with humans, but humans were still struggling to understand how to interact with the galaxy effectively. Their planetary history of integrating diverse cultures created this persistent optimism about interspecies relations that doesn't always align with galactic realities. Other civilizations observed this mismatch between human expectations and actual interstellar politics with mixed amusement and concern. The uncomfortable truth is that humanity's best qualities make them both incredibly dangerous and profoundly endangered in equal measure. Their cooperative nature allows them to achieve collectively what they cannot accomplish individually. But that same trait makes them susceptible to manipulation by species that understand how to exploit their openness. They're simultaneously the galaxy's most promising alliance partners and its most easily compromised negotiators. This vulnerability extends beyond simple deception. Their tendency to prioritize moral principles over practical concerns leads them into conflicts that offer no strategic benefit, wasting resources on principled stands that more pragmatic species would avoid. What they gain in reputation as reliable allies, they lose in operational efficiency and strategic focus. The Vashtai observed this pattern with growing understanding. Humans will consistently choose what they perceive as right over what might be smart, creating predictable patterns that can be anticipated and manipulated. Their rapid expansion across sectors compounds these vulnerabilities. Without established diplomatic protocols or experienced intelligence networks, they're operating with planetary-era thinking in a galactic-era environment. This gap between their operational scale and their institutional knowledge creates critical weaknesses that more established civilizations are learning to recognize and exploit. The very speed of their expansion becomes a liability when it outpaces their ability to develop proper security protocols, which brings us to why this particular story about a bar confrontation matters far beyond one cantina's scratched counter. The next time you face something too powerful to fight, remember how the right story told at the right moment can shift entire power dynamics. Watch how you approach your own conflicts today. You might find more leverage than you thought once you understand what actually motivates the other side. That human with a beard didn't just save a freighter captain's life. He reminded the entire galaxy that even predators appreciate someone who bothers to remember their brother's name. Sometimes the simplest connections rewrite the most complicated rules. In Vashti culture, marks are not just decorative symbols. They're binding agreements physically etched into reality, carrying more legal and cultural weight than any digital contract or verbal promise. When Thakmor burned the Crimson Talon clan mark into Zixth's bar counter, he wasn't just making a dramatic gesture. He was altering Danny's legal status throughout Vashti-controlled space in the most permanent way their society recognizes. The mark represented something unprecedented in interspecies relations. For a human to receive such recognition was like being granted diplomatic immunity by a nation that previously considered you part of the food chain. Predator cultures often place greater value on symbolic physical gestures than written agreements precisely because they're publicly visible and extremely difficult to revoke. Once that mark was burned into the counter, every Vashti who entered Zixth's would see it and understand its meaning without needing explanation. This changed Danny's operational parameters completely. He could now travel through sectors previously considered suicide runs for humans. Vashti patrols wouldn't automatically target his ship for boarding or harassment. He gained access to trade routes and information networks that were completely off limits to other species. The mark essentially functioned as both passport and protection in territories where humans typically ended up as statistics and missing persons reports. Such public recognition frequently serves as the preliminary step toward formal diplomatic relations between previously hostile civilizations. The physical nature of the mark ensures that denial or retraction would require public explanation, making it a more stable foundation for trust than temporary agreements. Danny's response to this extraordinary honor wasn't gratitude or ceremony. It was pure practicality. He immediately started calculating how this changed his shipping routes and which dangerous sectors just became profitable to traverse. The real significance wasn't the metal scar on the bar counter. It was the cultural shift it represented. The Vashti had officially categorized a human not as prey or pest, but as inconvenient ally. This reclassification came with obligations and protections that rewrote the rules of engagement in neutral space. Danny's status shifted from potential casualty to protected asset, changing how both species would interact in future conflicts. The mark's placement in Zixth's cantina ensured maximum visibility. This particular establishment served as the galaxy's unofficial crossroads, meaning the news would spread through every smuggling route and intelligence network within weeks. The physical evidence couldn't be disputed or hidden. Anyone could visit and see the Crimson Talon symbol burned into the counter beside the sticky drink rings and knife scratches. What followed wasn't celebration or ceremony, but a conversation that would redefine how both species understood courage and its practical applications in interspecies relations. Thakmor made a brutally accurate assessment that night. Danny was either brilliantly brave or catastrophically foolish, with very little middle ground available for interpretation. The Vashti Elder recognized something fundamental about human risk assessment that most species miss. Where predators calculate pure survival odds based on physical capability and threat levels, humans frequently prioritize principle over safety. They'll weigh what's right against what's safe and sometimes choose the option that makes no tactical sense but satisfies some internal moral calculation. This creates situations where you see humans performing what looks like tactical suicide from the outside. It's the difference between executing a proper retreat and standing your ground simply because someone needs to hold that position. Human neurological responses to danger incorporate social valuation alongside personal survival calculations. They're not just evaluating whether they can survive an encounter. They're evaluating whether surviving while allowing something wrong to happen would be worse than not surviving at all. Thakmor noted something peculiar about human reflexes. They seem optimized for last-second decisions rather than cautious avoidance. This behavioral pattern frequently appears in species that evolved as cooperative hunters rather than solitary predators. Solitary hunters tend to disengage early when odds look unfavorable. Cooperative hunters often wait until the last possible moment, calculating whether collective action might still salvage the situation. This explains why humans frequently intervene in conflicts they should probably avoid. They're wired to believe coordinated effort might still succeed, even when individual capability suggests otherwise. The distinction between courage and stupidity became the foundation for their negotiation. Thakmor understood that what appeared reckless from a Vashtai perspective might represent calculated risk from a human viewpoint. Humans often operate on the principle that conventional wisdom about survival odds might be wrong if you introduce new variables like cooperation or unconventional tactics. They'll take actions that look suicidal because they're betting that standard threat assessments don't account for human creativity under pressure. This understanding changed the diplomatic equation completely. Thakmor stopped evaluating Danny's actions through predator logic and started considering them through the lens of cooperative hunting strategies. He recognized that courage and stupidity sometimes look identical until you account for the human tendency to factor in moral considerations and potential group dynamics. The willingness to take seemingly foolish risks sometimes creates opportunities that cautious avoidance would miss entirely. How does courage versus stupidity become the key to interspecies diplomacy? When both species recognize that calculated risk sometimes achieves what caution cannot, the Vashtai began to understand that human risk assessment includes variables their own calculations ignore. Humans consider not just whether they can survive, but whether survival under certain conditions would be acceptable. This led to a broader discussion about why humans are so dangerously cooperative when facing threats. Thakmor made a crucial observation that night. Humans aren't dangerous despite their tendency to cooperate. They're dangerous specifically because of it. Most predator species operate within strict kinship boundaries. They'll coordinate with immediate family or clan members, but that's where cooperation ends. Humans do something different. They'll form functional alliances with complete strangers who happen to share temporary goals or principles. This ability to rapidly organize across genetic lines creates an unpredictable variable in any conflict equation. It's like watching what should be solitary hunters suddenly coordinating into effective packs with individuals they met approximately 5 minutes earlier. Cross-group cooperation represents a significant evolutionary advantage that frequently allows less physically capable species to overcome opponents who should dominate them easily. Human history shows repeated examples where technologically inferior but better organized groups defeat forces that appear superior on paper. This cooperation instinct likely developed to compensate for humanity's physical limitations compared to other predators. Without natural weapons or defensive capabilities, early humans survived by developing social structures that leveraged collective action. That evolutionary adaptation now manifests in their approach to galactic interactions. They'll coordinate with merchants, smugglers, military personnel, and even former enemies if the situation demands it. The Vashtai began to understand that humanity's real strength wasn't individual capability. It was this collective capacity to organize rapidly around shared objectives. What makes humans dangerous when they're not working together? Essentially nothing. That's the precise point. Their effectiveness multiplies dramatically when they coordinate. A single human might be manageable. A group of humans working toward common goals becomes exponentially more problematic for anyone opposing them. This cooperative instinct extends beyond just working with allies. It influences how humans perceive potential enemies and neutral parties. They maintain this persistent categorization of not yet allies rather than permanent enemy designations. This outlook frequently frustrates species with more rigid social structures who prefer clear boundaries between friend and foe. The human tendency to see potential cooperation, where others see only threat, creates diplomatic opportunities that more categorical species miss entirely. Thakmor recognized that this represented both strategic opportunity and vulnerability. Humanity's cooperation-based approach could be leveraged for mutual benefit, but it also made them susceptible to manipulation by species that understood how to exploit their collaborative instincts. The willingness to help strangers created openings for deception that more isolated predator cultures would naturally avoid. This understanding of human social dynamics became the foundation for re-evaluating the entire confrontation. The warrior wasn't just dealing with an individual human. He was confronting a representative of a species whose entire evolutionary strategy revolved around turning strangers into temporary allies against common threats. Danny's behavior made more sense when viewed through the lens of cooperative hunting strategies rather than individual survival calculations. The conversation shifted from evaluating immediate threats to discussing how cooperation patterns influence interspecies relations. Thakmore began asking questions about human social structures, alliance formation, and what motivated their willingness to assist non-kin. This line of inquiry revealed that humans often operate on principles that prioritize collective outcomes over individual survival in ways that seem irrational to species with different evolutionary backgrounds. This cooperative instinct extends to how humans fundamentally perceive other species, not as fixed threats or allies. Danny articulated the fundamental difference that night. We don't see us in them. We see us and potential us. Most species operate with binary categorizations: ally or enemy, friend or foe, predator or prey. Humans maintain this third category that others find confusing: not yet ally. It's like looking at raw materials instead of finished products. Everything represents potential relationships rather than fixed positions. This perspective allows humans to form alliances with species that traditional predators would consider natural enemies. The diplomatic flexibility creates opportunities where others see only threats. It's the difference between viewing a locked door as a barrier versus seeing it as wood and metal that could become something else entirely. Cognitive flexibility and social categorization strongly correlates with successful diplomatic outcomes across species lines because it allows for adaptation rather than rigid confrontation. This outlook naturally frustrates more categorical species, who prefer clear boundaries between friend and foe. The Vashtai initially found this approach baffling. Their culture emphasizes clear hierarchies and defined relationships. The human tendency to see potential cooperation where others see only threat creates both opportunities and misunderstandings. The potential ally mindset likely derives from humanity's own planetary history of integrating wildly different cultures and competing factions into functional societies over centuries. Thakmore began to understand that human diplomacy isn't primarily about managing existing threats. It's about manufacturing new allies from neutral or even hostile parties. This represents a proactive approach to interspecies relations rather than reactive positioning. Humans don't just work with who's available, they actively cultivate relationships with those who might become partners given the right circumstances and incentives. Why do humans see potential allies where other species see permanent enemies? Because their own history taught them that enemies frequently become friends with sufficient time, negotiation, and shared experiences. Earth's history is essentially a record of former adversaries becoming trading partners, allies, and sometimes even integrated societies. This historical pattern shapes their galactic approach. They assume most conflicts are temporary and most relationships are negotiable given the right conditions. This perspective explains why Danny could shift from discussing temporal mechanics to discussing Vashtai family structures without apparent difficulty. He wasn't just evading questions, he was exploring potential common ground. The human approach treats every interaction as potentially the beginning of a relationship, rather than simply an exchange of information or threats. This changes how they approach everything from trade negotiations to conflict resolution. Meanwhile, the ship they'd been arguing about was returning. The Wandering Star's arrival would provide the physical evidence to support Danny's claims and fundamentally alter the dynamics of the confrontation. The timing created this perfect convergence of philosophical discussion and practical verification that would test whether human diplomatic approaches could actually work with a species hardwired for categorical thinking. The combination of theoretical flexibility and concrete evidence would either validate Danny's approach or demonstrate its limitations when facing fundamentally different cognitive frameworks. The Wandering Star didn't just return with empty cargo holds. It returned with the kind of documentation that makes conspiracy theories collapse under their own weight. Victoria Vasquez's ship appeared right on schedule, medical supplies fully delivered, refugees safely relocated to their designated sanctuary zones. Her arrival timing matched Danny's predictions exactly, which immediately undermined the warrior's initial premise about her involvement. Her ship's logs provided something better than excuses. They offered verifiable facts. The navigation data showed her complete absence from the Syndicate ambush coordinates during the critical hours. The timestamps were precise, cross-referenced with multiple galactic positioning systems, and included secondary verification from independent sensor buoys along her route. This wasn't testimony or interpretation. This was raw data that placed her somewhere else entirely when the attack happened. The documentation quality eliminated reasonable doubt through sheer thoroughness. Contemporaneous records like ship logs and cargo manifests often prove more convincing than retrospective testimony because they capture events as they happen, without the distortion of later interpretation or agenda. Her record showed routine check-ins, standard course adjustments, and normal communications, nothing that suggested evasion or unusual activity. The cargo manifest detailed exactly what you'd expect for a medical relief mission: sterilization equipment, antiviral compounds, nutritional supplements, and emergency field hospitals. No hidden compartments, no unexplained mass discrepancies, no suspicious chemical signatures. The completeness of her records presented the Vashti with a clear choice: accept verifiable evidence or reject observable reality. For a species that values concrete data over emotional appeals, this created a significant cognitive dissonance. The logs showed her performing standard humanitarian work, while someone else was attacking Kethvar's ship. The precision of the documentation made the possibility of cover-up operation statistically improbable. The coordination required to fake that much data across multiple systems would have been more complicated than actually conducting the ambush. What happened when Victoria returned from her relief mission? She provided the missing puzzle piece that transformed suspicion into confirmed innocence. Her evidence didn't just suggest she wasn't involved, it demonstrated impossibility through temporal and spatial contradictions. The ship's navigational data placed her 12 light minutes away during the attack window, with continuous engine burn records showing no course deviations that could have put her near the ambush site. This evidence didn't just clear her name. It fundamentally redirected the investigation. The Vashti warrior now faced the uncomfortable realization that he'd been pursuing the wrong target entirely. The thorough documentation shifted suspicion back toward internal Vashti politics rather than external interference. The logs showed Victoria conducting exactly the mission she claimed to be running, which meant the real threat likely came from within, their own security apparatus rather than from human meddling. The timing of her return created this perfect convergence of philosophical discussion and physical proof. Danny's explanations about temporal relativity and human cooperation patterns suddenly gained concrete support from the ship's verification systems. The combination of theoretical flexibility and hard evidence forced the Vashti to reconsider their entire approach to the investigation. They weren't just dealing with a missing scout anymore. They were confronting evidence of internal betrayal that their cultural frameworks had difficulty processing. With Victoria completely cleared by the overwhelming evidence, the Vashti attention pivoted to the real question nobody had been asking. Who actually set up Kethvar? The Syndicate raiders were just tools, violent instruments carrying out someone else's plan. The attack precision required inside knowledge of his patrol route, shield frequencies, and system vulnerabilities. This wasn't random piracy. This suggested the threat came from within Vashti society itself, likely from someone who stood to benefit from eliminating a specific warrior. The hunting party suddenly faced the uncomfortable realization they'd been pointing claws in the wrong direction. While they focused on external threats, the real danger operated behind them, wearing the same uniform and sharing the same command structure. Internal threats often prove more damaging than external ones precisely because they exploit established trust and system knowledge. Betrayal from within bypasses defensive measures designed to stop outside attacks. Danny's intervention had accidentally exposed an internal Vashti conflict that might have remained hidden indefinitely. His decision to save Kethvar and subsequent involvement created this chain of events that revealed inconsistencies in the official narrative. Such redirections frequently occur when external parties inadvertently reveal flaws in internal stories that everyone else accepts without question. The humans' actions served as an unexpected auditing system for Vashti internal security. The sophistication of the assassination method confirmed this wasn't some random act of violence. Advanced civilizations often develop killing techniques that mimic natural causes to avoid retaliation cycles. The bioweapon designed to look like aggressive cancer demonstrated planning and resources beyond typical syndicate operations. The timing, just when Kethvar might have identified his betrayer, eliminated the one person who could expose the conspiracy. The human hadn't just saved a freighter captain from mistaken accusations. He'd exposed a fundamental betrayal within the Predator's own ranks that threatened clan stability. How does one barroom standoff reshape future interspecies relations? By demonstrating that sometimes the real enemy wears the same uniform and speaks the same language. The Vashtai were forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that their greatest vulnerabilities might come from within rather than from external threats. This realization created an unexpected partnership opportunity. The very human qualities that initially seemed reckless or foolish, the willingness to intervene, the cooperative instinct, the moral flexibility about enemy categorizations, suddenly appeared valuable for investigating internal corruption. Thakmore recognized that sometimes you need an outside perspective to see problems that have become invisible through familiarity and accepted protocols. The investigation shifted from hunting humans to hunting traitors, and human characteristics that seemed like liabilities in confrontation became assets in investigation. Their tendency to question established narratives and look for unconventional patterns might actually help uncover who betrayed Kethvar and why. The clan mark on the bar counter now represented not just protection for a human, but potential assistance in solving an internal crisis. Thakmore proposed something that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. He would travel with Danny to observe human interactions directly. The Vashtai elder recognized that understanding humanity wasn't just academic curiosity. It might provide tactical advantages in dealing with internal clan threats that traditional approaches couldn't address. This meant a predator would be voluntarily living alongside what his culture classified as prey species, violating established natural orders that both sides found fundamentally uncomfortable. It was conceptually like watching a wolf decide to study shepherding techniques from the sheep's perspective. The arrangement felt unnatural to everyone involved, but carried revolutionary potential if it worked. Immersive cultural exchange frequently produces more effective diplomatic outcomes than formal negotiations between separated parties because it forces participants to confront assumptions rather than debate positions. Living together creates understanding that conference rooms cannot replicate. Danny's perspective offered specific insights into cooperation and alliance building that Vashtai culture lacked. Their society emphasized individual achievement and clan loyalty, but humans demonstrated this capacity to form functional partnerships across species lines based on shared principles rather than genetic similarity. Such cross-cultural immersion often leads to innovation in conflict resolution techniques precisely because it forces participants to question methods they've always taken for granted. This wasn't primarily about friendship or cultural appreciation. Thakmore approached this as strategic intelligence gathering through direct coexistence. He needed to understand how humanity's cooperative instincts could be leveraged against internal threats that traditional Vashtai methods struggled to counter. The elder recognized that sometimes you need completely different perspectives to solve problems that have become invisible. Through cultural familiarity, their collaboration promised to illuminate not just human nature through observation, but Vashtai nature through contrast. By seeing his own culture reflected through human reactions and questions, Thakmore might identify strengths and weaknesses that remained hidden when only viewed from within. This mutual examination could reveal why certain diplomatic approaches worked while others consistently failed when dealing with other species. The arrangement created practical complications that both sides had to navigate. Danny's freighter wasn't designed for Vashtai physiological needs, requiring temporary modifications to accommodate different atmospheric requirements and sleeping arrangements. The cultural differences extended to basic interactions. Everything from meal preparation to conflict resolution styles had to be negotiated rather than assumed. What made this educational opportunity particularly valuable was its timing. The Vashtai were facing internal threats that their traditional methods seemed poorly equipped to handle. Human approaches to problem-solving might offer alternative strategies for identifying and neutralizing threats that operated within their own command structures. Sometimes external perspectives spot patterns that become invisible to those too close to the situation. As they prepared to depart the cantina, the regulars watched with the quiet understanding that they were witnessing something unprecedented. The collaboration represented a fundamental shift in how species might interact along the contested borders of neutral space. This wasn't just two individuals traveling together. It was an experiment in whether profoundly different cultures could find common ground through direct experience rather than mediated negotiations. The educational value worked both directions. While Thakmor sought to understand human cooperation patterns, Danny would gain insights into Vashti clan politics and military structures that few outsiders ever witnessed. This exchange of perspectives promised benefits for both parties, though the immediate discomfort of breaking long-established cultural barriers made the initial adjustment challenging for everyone involved. Their departure left the cantina physically unchanged but fundamentally altered in how its patrons understood interspecies relations. The mark on the bar counter now represented not just protection but possibility, evidence that even the most entrenched enemy categories might be renegotiated given the right circumstances and willingness to endure temporary discomfort for potential long-term gain. The cantina regulars watch them leave with that quiet awareness people get when they know they've witnessed something that will become legend. Zixthus returned to its familiar rhythm of failing environmental systems and questionable decisions, but with this permanent alteration to its physical reality. The Crimson Talon clan mark burned into the bar counter changed everything about the space without changing any of its essential dysfunction. Physical reminders of extraordinary events become focal points for cultural memory in ways that oral traditions can't match. That mark served as tangible evidence that the story wasn't just another bar tale getting exaggerated with retelling. It was like finding a royal seal stamped on a roadside diner's counter, completely out of place contextually, but undeniable in its authenticity. The symbol transformed the cantina from merely dangerous to historically significant. For the regular patrons, this meant humans could now drink there with slightly less immediate fear of being eaten. That's not exactly diplomatic immunity, but in neutral space it counts as meaningful progress. Such symbols often catalyze broader social changes by making extraordinary events visibly present in ordinary spaces. The mark didn't just protect Danny. It signaled to everyone that the rules of engagement had been permanently altered. Through that encounter, the story spread through neutral space faster than any official communication could travel. Smugglers carried it along trade routes, mercenaries discussed it in hiring halls, and information brokers adjusted their risk assessments based on this new variable. The tale gained details with each retelling, but the core remained consistent. A human facing down a Vashti warrior with nothing but a beer bottle and inconvenient timing. Zixthus became both a place and a story simultaneously. The physical location continued operating as it always had, with the same questionable drinks and unreliable gravity, but it now also existed as narrative, a place where something impossible had become possible through stubbornness and alcohol. The mark ensured that every new patron would eventually ask about its origin, keeping the story alive through constant retelling. The broader implications took time to become apparent. Initially, it just seemed like an interesting anomaly, one human managing to survive what should have been certain death. But patterns emerged as the story spread. Other humans began testing the new boundaries, cautiously exploring previously forbidden sectors. Vashti patrols demonstrated noticeably different behavior when encountering human vessels, often allowing passage where they previously would have interdicted. What made this transformation interesting was how it operated outside official channels. No treaties were signed, no diplomatic agreements negotiated. The change spread through the unofficial networks that actually control neutral space. The smugglers, merchants, and information brokers who understand that real power operates beneath official recognition. The cantina's regulars became accidental ambassadors for this new reality simply by witnessing it and carrying the story forward. The mark's presence created this fascinating dissonance between the cantina's physical reality and its new symbolic meaning. You'd have patrons dodging floating drinks due to gravity fluctuations while simultaneously discussing how that exact spot had changed interspecies relations. The combination of mundane danger and extraordinary significance became Zixth's new normal. This story didn't just change how humans and Vashti interacted. It altered how all species perceived risk calculation in neutral space. If a human could survive a Vashti confrontation through conversation rather than combat, perhaps other impossible things might also be possible given the right approach. The cantina became living proof that established power dynamics aren't always as fixed as they appear. The broader implications of that night would reshape diplomatic approaches across multiple sectors. But that realization would come later. For now, the regulars simply appreciated that they could drink with slightly reduced chances of becoming someone's dinner. Sometimes progress measures in small but significant upgrades. The encounter at Zixth didn't just resolve a confrontation. It quietly established a precedent that began altering interactions across contested sectors. Word spread through the usual channels. Smugglers updating risk assessments, merchants adjusting trade routes, information brokers recalculating odds. The story consistently featured one surprising detail. Humans could apparently negotiate with Vashtai without becoming dismembered in the process. This single data point changed risk calculations for everyone operating along those volatile borders. It was like discovering a previously impassable canyon now had a functional bridge. Shipping lanes that were effectively closed due to Vashtai patrols suddenly became potentially navigable. Single dramatic incidents often affect diplomatic relations disproportionately because they provide concrete examples of what's possible rather than theoretical scenarios. The story demonstrated that confrontation wasn't the only available outcome when encountering predator species. Other civilizations began re-evaluating humans through a different lens. Instead of seeing them as physically vulnerable prey species, they started considering their potential as intermediaries with predator cultures. Reputation shifts like this create cascading effects throughout diplomatic networks because they alter fundamental assumptions about capability and reliability. Merchants started including humans in negotiations where Vashtai interests were involved. Smugglers began consulting human pilots about route planning through previously avoided sectors. Danny's beer-fueled standoff had accidentally created an unofficial diplomatic channel where none existed before. The story's power came from its simplicity and plausibility. A lone human in a failing bar using conversation rather than weapons to survive what should have been certain death. The galaxy gradually learned that sometimes the most effective weapon isn't a plasma rifle or enhanced claws. It's the right story delivered at the right moment to the right audience. What made this particular story so effective was its setting in a neutral zone cantina. These places function as information exchange hubs where tales spread quickly and gain credibility through multiple independent confirmations. The physical evidence of the clan mark on the bar counter gave the story tangible proof that prevented dismissal as mere rumor or exaggeration. The narrative transformed from entertainment to practical intelligence that affected operational decisions. The incident demonstrated how values and shared understanding could transform potentially violent confrontations into unlikely partnerships. This outcome underscored how storytelling and mutual respect could influence interspecies relations in ways that formal diplomacy often struggled to achieve. The legend circulated through galactic networks, influencing how various species approached interactions with humans and potentially other predator cultures. The establishment of this precedent revealed how quickly perceptions can shift when presented with compelling evidence that challenges existing assumptions. The cascade effect showed that single events can alter complex diplomatic landscapes when they capture the imagination and practical attention of those operating in contested spaces. This transformation occurred outside official channels, through the networks that actually control day-to-day operations in neutral territories. Which brings us to the uncomfortable question about what this reveals regarding human nature. Specifically, here's what the Vashtai learned that night through painful first-hand experience. Humanity's greatest tactical advantage is simultaneously their most glaring strategic vulnerability. That willingness to help complete strangers makes humans dangerously unpredictable as potential allies while rendering them almost laughably easy to manipulate. This empathy that facilitates diplomatic breakthroughs and alliance formation creates countless exploitation opportunities for species with fewer ethical constraints. It's like installing a security system that automatically welcomes everyone until they demonstrate hostile intent. Effective for building networks quickly, disastrous for preventing infiltration. Species with highly developed cooperation instincts historically suffer elevated exploitation rates until they evolve more sophisticated threat assessment mechanisms. The transition period between naive openness and experienced caution typically involves significant losses that force adaptation. The Vashtai rapidly recognized that humanity's openness represented both tremendous strategic opportunity and considerable strategic risk. Their tendency to categorize outsiders as potential us, rather than permanent threats, creates openings for manipulation that more cautious species would immediately avoid. This cognitive flexibility allows rapid alliance formation, but also permits hostile actors to exploit goodwill for extended periods before detection.